Sharper Than a Serpent's Tooth. Written by the Hangman 317 and read by Purple Star. Chapter 6. Entrance Exams Start. Era shook the nerves from her hands as she stepped out of the testing room, suppressing a yawn as a headache threatened to bloom at her temples. Shit, that could have gone better. Why did she need to know any of that shit anyway? Those ethic questions? Give me a break. She'd expected UA's exam to be a little different than most. But what kind of school gave the trolley problem to a bunch of hopefuls, and then expected them to write a goddamn essay about it? Not to mention the fact that Era was certain she could have done better had she been able to get any sleep last night. But no, she had to be weak and let her mounting anxiety get the best of her. Had to let it sit and stew and simmer in her chest until she felt she might burst if she didn't get off her ass and get something, anything, done. Yeah, she'd definitely have done better if she hadn't been patrolling all night. Idiot. Her legs still ached from where a bullet had nicked her femoral artery, and she was sure that there was a nasty scar and a sickly bruise beneath her pants, even though the bullet had been removed hours ago. This is not my fucking day, she murmured beneath her breath, gazing out over the sea of applicants through hooded eyes. Everyone was breaking for lunch, taking the chance to rest and recover before the mysterious practical portion of the exam. For her part, Era had a bag of potato chips and half a bottle of water. So she was in a bit of a rush this morning. Sewer. Era managed to find a quiet corner by herself, where she wasn't likely to be bothered by any overly friendly strangers, and she could eat her stale chips in peace. Maybe even get some rest while she was at it. A quick little nap couldn't hurt. Just 15 minutes. She leaned back, letting her eyes fall closed for only a moment.
You there! Were you planning on just lazing about? Do you have no respect for the sanctity of this exam?
Era repressed the groan that bubbled up in her throat, cracking open a single eye to glare at whoever had spoken. The kid had glasses, blue hair, and a stern expression that bordered on hostile. And honestly, at this point, she wasn't really inclined to look past that. Dude, do you make a habit of this? I'm just resting, preparing for whatever the practical's gonna be. He paused for a moment, seeming to seriously consider this response, before falling into a near-perfect bow.
Of course. Ensuring you are well rested for the challenge ahead speaks to great foresight. I apologize for my rudeness.
Accepted? He straightened once more, adjusting his glasses.
I am Ida Tenya, by the way.
The boy, Ida, paused almost expectantly. Era sighed. Suzuki Era. Nice to meet you.
And you as well.
Right. Of course. She paused, delicately turning the situation over in her mind, desperately trying to find some way to get this kid to leave her alone so she could get some fucking sleep before... A bell rang, shrill and piercing. Era suppressed yet another groan as Ida's head snapped towards the noise.
Ah, that must be the signal for the testing to resume. Well, good luck, Suzuki.
Yeah, you too. She warily watched him march off before gathering her scant possessions and rising to follow.
Hold it, you fucking nerd!
It wasn't addressed to her, but still, Era paused, winced. Not my damn business. Not my damn...
I told you I was the only one from her shitty school getting into UA!
Two boys, one blonde and one with a mop of green hair. The blonde was looming, sneering, palms smoking with whatever his quirk was.
You think you're better than me, huh? I'll fucking kill you!
While I can appreciate your enthusiasm, Perhaps you should hold off on baseless threats until after the exam. She could hardly believe she was speaking, and honestly, it seemed like the fiery blonde was of a similar opinion. He opened his mouth to respond, eyes blazing, miniature explosions bursting from his palms. But another loud shriek of the bell cut him off. Final warning. His jaw shut with a snap. Whirling around to jab a finger at the other boy's chest, he snarled, "This isn't over, Deku!" And with that, he stormed off. Era watched him go, suppressing another yawn. He seems nice. Haha, yeah, Ka-chan is... Ka-chan. Quite a mouth on him. She began walking back towards the testing rooms, side-eyeing the short green-haired boy as he fell into step alongside her. Era noted the slope of his shoulders, the hunch of his spine, the tremble of his fingers, before he let out a long breath and slowly straightened out his posture to stand tall once more. Still a short little fucker, though. Thanks for your help back there. He managed to stammer out after a couple tries. No problem. He seems like an ass. Era shot him a thin smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was too tired for this shit. He's Ka-chan. I get that, yeah. They walked in silence for a bit, soon rejoining the bustle of students struggling to get through the small door of the testing room, and coming to a stop near the back of the boisterous line. Era sighed, scratching at one of her wrists. Name's Suzuki Era, by the way. Oh, Midoriya Izuku. Nice to meet you. She gave a distracted hum, staring out over the rest of the applicants. Damn, there are a lot of fucking people here, huh? What? Oh, yeah, I suppose so. Take a fucking breath, kid. You're giving me anxiety just watching you. He froze, running a hand through his already messy hair with an anxious laugh. Sorry, I guess I'm just a little nervous. Era huffed. Who wouldn't be? But obviously you're here, so you've got something to show him. She looked up again as she finally passed through the doorway, eyes searching for her seat. Good luck, Midoriya. Oh, you too! What a weird bunch of kids. She rubbed at her temples and slid into her seat. They were just all so genuine. Even that explosion boy. He hadn't hesitated to speak his mind. It was exhausting. Is this what people her age were always like? So much thinking and overthinking, and in the end just blurting out whatever thought popped into their heads. They would have died, she realized. A cold pit opened in her chest, clawing at the inside of her ribcage, threatening to tear through her throat. Those were normal children, people her age, and they would have died. Her teachers would never have suffered them, would have written them off as hopeless, lost causes. Weak, childish little. Only the blaring, obnoxious voice of Present Mike jolted her out of that spiraling panic attack in waiting. Era jolted, gripping at the bottom of her seat with white-knuckled hands, as she forced herself to focus on the task set before her. Robots. Oh, Shinsou was going to lose his goddamn mind. They seriously expected them to destroy robots? Multiple robots? All this talk of 1, 2, and 3-pointers. The students all milling about just inside the miniature city that was their testing area. What did it fucking matter? Some of these kids could rip through steel, shoot electricity from their goddamn fingertips. All she had was a regeneration quirk that she couldn't even fucking use properly if she didn't want someone to call the cops on her faster than she could say, "Why in the name of fucking God is it robots?" The only silver lining she could think of was, thank fuck they allowed support items. Era had more than a few knives strapped beneath her clothes. She could find weak points, pry off bits of metal, cut through exposed wiring. Breathe. She could do this. Era had been forced to operate in worse conditions, and besides, if she failed, she might still make general education. She didn't want to even begin to consider why that thought left such a hot, churning ball of disappointment deep in her chest.
Begin!
Oh shit! And Era was off, tearing past her confused fellow applicants. Well, she supposed they were opponents now, just a few seconds before her brain could catch up to the rest of her body. Her eyes caught a shock of purple hair, met a familiar pair of tired eyes for an endless few seconds, before they gave each other a curt nod and split off into opposite directions. She didn't need to talk to Shinsou to know what that meant.
I'll stay out of your way if you stay out of mine.
The feeling was mutual. Era had no desire to screw him over. It seemed like the rest of her opponents would be granting her no such courtesy, blasting away with reckless abandon. And Era gritted her teeth whenever a nearby explosion or screech of metal assaulted her ears. She'd just have to stick to low-trafficked areas and hope she'd got lucky. Era was seldom lucky. A robot burst through a building, stumbling into the road ahead of her as Era barely managed to scramble to a hasty stop and roll out of the way of flying debris. Holy shit! Whatever cute little visual aid Present Mike had shown them could not have prepared her for the monstrosity that towered above her. Through the dust and rubble, Era could vaguely make out a crisp 1 painted across its metal plating. 1? 1? Era snarled as she threw 2 daggers from beneath her jacket. Not a very becoming expression, she knew, but this whole situation was getting away from her. She rushed forwards, nimbly dodging piles of shattered brick and twisted steel as the robot's glowing red eye slowly turned to fix itself upon her. There was a terrible whirring, sparks of electricity thrumming just past that bright red dot as power surged and swelled until, with a crack of energy, the eye shot out with a single beam that scoured through the asphalt beneath Era's feet. She rolled to the side, leapt to her feet, and kept running once more, all in one smooth motion. Another whir. The clatter of machinery as the robot began to swing its arm. Era ducked beneath it, hissing as it slammed into the ground behind her and sent little bits of gravel to slice across her skin. She stopped, pivoted, jammed a blade into a seam in its armor, and clambered up the arm as it retracted. The thing shuddered and began to train its eye on her once more, but Era raced up the arm and slammed her second blade deep into the lens, twisting it further into the complex components beyond, and wincing as shards of glass and machinery raked across her wrist. It trembled, and Era nearly lost her balance as it fell to the ground, lifeless. Well, that was 1 point. She withdrew the blade, discreetly wiping the blood across her shirt. This was going to be a long fucking 10 minutes. Era managed to take down a few more 1-pointers, a couple 2-pointers, and even a hulking 3-pointer with much the same technique. But she could feel the time slipping through her fingers, and she could see the wreckage the other applicants had left in her wake, when she couldn't feel anything but useless. She took to busier routes, desperately hunting for any sign of her quarry, but every sound of whirring machinery was quickly cut short by the unmistakable cacophony of brutal destruction. It seemed like no matter which road she cut through, there were nothing but the smoking husks of metal that meant another applicant had gotten there first. Every single crumpled robot was another wrenching twist of a knife embedded deep in her gut. And it took all of her self-control to keep her breathing steady, her focus sharp, her ears strained for any nearby robots. Briefly, she took to the rooftops, but it was little help. She could see a lot more, but she didn't have a way to make it down quickly enough to actually capitalize. So, instead, she was just running blind and hoping for the best, which is how she ended up bursting into the center of the testing facility. Just in time to see Shinsou facing off against a robot 5 times his size. This couldn't go well. Era took a step forward, stumbling as the ground shook beneath her. All around her, applicants had stopped fighting and looked down the road towards the dead center of the facility. There, with heavy, lumbering steps that left tremors in its wake, rose the hulking figure of the zero-pointer.
Arena trap indeed.
Yeah, that was a no from Era. She'd had enough of this bullshit for today. Thank you very much. The giant robot took another earth-shattering step, and Era barely managed not to trip over the trembles that ran through the ground. To prepare herself for the quaking beneath her as she turned, ready to join her fleeing opponents and dive down some side street again. Try her luck there. Shinsou ran forward, reaching out towards the 2-pointer in front of him. It swiped out with a long metal tail and slammed into his side, throwing the boy into a building before scrambling down a street, seeming to flee the 0-pointer as well. He rolled into the road, motionless.
Get up, get up, get up, get up!
No one was around. They'd all run away, trying to find something that was actually worth some points. Era should run too, she knew. There wasn't enough time, and if she didn't find some more robots now, she couldn't even hope to get into general education. And then she'd really be screwed. No contingencies, no backups. Just hold her breath and hope against hope that she could stay hidden. Fear. Constant fear along that path. But Shinsou wasn't moving, and the shuddering ground was growing more violent with every lurching step. Closer and closer and closer, and she could see it right then. Shinsou, buried under the buildings that collapsed in that monster's wake. Shinsou, crushed by cold steel. Shinsou, bloodied and broken and dead without a chance at coming back.
My fault.
Era rushed forward, towards the approaching monster that loomed above them, ignoring the shrill voice in the back of her head that screamed.
Idiot. You idiot. Just run away. Nothing will happen to him. It's not your business, you idiot. Just...
She slid to her knees, reached down to roll him over, and felt for his pulse.
Alive.
His nose looked bloodied, and as she reached down to heft his arm over her shoulder, his eyes opened, distant and unfocused.
Concussion?
What are you doing? His voice was slurred, and he winced as she dragged him upright, arms still draped across her shoulder. Saving your ass. Hold on. Their progress was slow, bordering on painful. Behind them, Eric could hear, with a trembling heart, every deafening footfall of that giant robot. The tremors so violent now that she couldn't stop herself from stumbling even when she knew they were coming. She felt Shinsou shake his head against her arm. What? Why? You should just go. A little busy, moron, said Era through gritted teeth, risking a glance back over her shoulder. Oh God, it was getting closer. Buildings collapsing in explosions of rubble and rock as it passed. And there, just ahead, was a little alleyway she knew would lead them to safety. Would take them away from its path if she could just fucking get there. Too slow. The horror dawned on her in lazy waves of nausea, a sickening shudder that she forced into a little box in the corner of her mind. They were too slow, and that beast was going to get them. Stomp them into the ground like little ants. She glanced behind her again. Part of the reason the ground shook so much was because of how high it lifted its feet before crashing them back down again. The action was slow, painstaking. Era stopped, feeling Shinsou stumble into her as she did. What the hell, Era? Shut up. She turned, facing the robot bearing down on them, forcing herself not to stare up at its impossibly high head, but instead to focus on its legs, how they moved, to watch as it drew closer and closer.
Era,
he stirred against her, groaning in her ear.
Why did you stop?
Don't worry, Shinsou. She gritted her teeth into a smile, ignoring his hiss of pain as she adjusted her grip on him and took a step forward. I know what I'm doing.
That does not...
He cut himself off with a gasp as Era began to run, wheezing when he was jostled against her before managing to spit out the rest of his sentence.
That does not inspire confidence.
Shut up and let me work. It was getting closer, and she needed to breathe. She needed to focus. This was all in the timing, and a single fuck-up would mean 2 smears of red against the shattered pavement. Shinsou, at least, obliged, although that might have been because he'd fallen unconscious again. Worrying, but she couldn't dwell on it. Breathe. Focus. She stopped, stumbling backwards as a huge hunk of metal came crashing down a few yards in front of her, pelting her with bits of rubble and a blinding gust of wind as it tore through the fake city street. Then, with a whir of pistons and the deafening clatter of machinery, the foot behind it began to slowly lift into the air. Now! Era surged forward as fast as she could manage, dragging Shinsou across the pockmarked ground, strewn with bits of broken-down robots and chunks of ruined buildings, towards the ruins behind the giant beast. Almost there. She could make it. She could make it, and they would be fine. The street was drenched in shadow. Era looked up, felt that familiar, twisting horror in her gut as she saw the second, enormous metal foot looming above her. It was a split-second decision, an itch in her palm and a stutter of her heart that had her tossing Shinsou from her shoulder, heaving him up from beneath his armpits and hurling him with all of her might past the shadow of the monster above them. She saw him fly, tumble, roll to a pained stop behind the giant robot. Era looked up at her imminent demise, and the only thing she could think of was, I wonder how much it'll hurt this time.
And that's time! The practical test's over. Now, if all my little listeners could please return to the starting area, we'll be there to give you some parting words and let you head on home. All right?
Era blinked. The foot hovered, motionless, just above her head, and she'd never felt so small. I think I'm going to have a panic attack, she said to no one in particular. Down the road, she heard Shinsou give a pained grunt in response. Era glanced towards him, then back up at the thing that she had been sure was going to crush her just a few seconds ago. Funny thing, perspective. From this side of the test, it became glaringly obvious that they'd never let any of them actually die. But it all just felt so real. The simulated city, the high stakes, the pressure to keep fighting.
Keep running. Don't let up or face the consequences. If you give up, you'll only suffer, little bird.
Era took a few steps forward, out of the zero-pointer shadow. She sat down in the rubble near Shinsou and stared ahead, numb until a staff member came to retrieve them. End of Chapter 6.